Hi, Sean. I just thought I'd be a champion of faith and pop in here and stop all this goddamn Buddhist shit before it goes way too far. It is my personal experience that anyone who claims to have the truth is wrong. And so I'm highly suspect of any sort of organized religious philosophy because I'm sure it's filled with flaws, Buddhism included. In your response to your Guardian's video about selflessness, you determined that in Buddhism, when the self-other distinction does not occur, this is when, in the true spiritual sense, you can have selflessness. However, I would postulate that this is not at all true either, because if there is in fact no self-other distinction, and all is united in unity, you cannot say that it is selfless any more than you can say that it is selfish. For, if I were to look at this, and if I were to realize, oh, I am in complete unity with my surroundings, I am integrated completely in the universe and the world around me, I am merely a part of the universe, and the universe is my true self. If I were to realize this, then acting in compassion and all these other things that we've been discussing, where you are acting necessarily for the betterment of the entire universe, acting for what is best for everything, is still acting in what is best for you, because you have recognized that you are everything. So, in this sense, you could still call the Buddhist arrangement of the universe and the Buddhist justification for actions to be a selfish one. It just depends on your definition, then, of the self. Because the self does not necessarily become the ego, then. The self is expanded from the ego to everything else. So it is still a very, in my opinion, selfish means of action. True selflessness, in my opinion, would be acting in a way that would be completely and utterly, in every way possible, detrimental to the self. However you personally conceive of the self, but that helps something else that you consider not the self. If you consider everything to be the self, you cannot say that you are selfless at all. And if you do not have this distinction of self-other, then the terms selfish and selfless mean absolutely nothing. So potentially one could think of such Buddhist philosophies as a spiritualized form of enlightened self-interest. Also, having these distinctions and stupid categories of like a spiritual context, what is the value of in fact creating these like separate contexts? Why do we have to separate everything? Why can we not use things like rational and spiritual as just pieces to the puzzle of the entire whole? You just have a spiritual perspective, that is not enough. And if you just have a rational perspective, that is also not enough. The actuality exists from the combination of all of these various factors, and in my opinion, trying to split it up into, well, you have to think of this in a spiritual sense, and you have to think of this in a rational sense, doesn't make any sense. And I would say the same with your distinction of individuality in this context, like spiritual or societal individuality. What's the difference? Why does there need to be a difference? What distinguishes one from the other? I think often if you set up rules and limitations, it presents an opportunity within those rules and limitations to expand and focus in ways that one could not without such rules and limitations. And this is very much how I see the construct of the self. Not necessarily the ego, but the self. I think the boundaries and limitations on the self allow for greater energy expression than would be possible if everything was completely and freely integrated, which is why I particularly am still attached to this idea of the self. Something else that troubled me very deeply was this talk of impossible to explain until you have experienced it. Ooh, experience. I shudder at the thought. You have to be very careful with personal experiences and accounts of personal experiences, because they in fact indicate nothing in and of themselves other than that the person themselves experienced it. I don't think personal experiences really can be any sort of reliable source of truth, because our perceptions are very different from what exists in actuality. So ponder for a second the idea that if such an experience where one recognizes complete unity with everything else around, and that everything is unified in this sort of spiritual sense, this makes very good sense because it is also just how everything is organized. We are all beings made of energy, and all this energy is connected in this, in the universe. We are constantly in flux. We are beings of energy that do not really exist, quote unquote. What if the experience of this is merely a mental state where one is deluded into feeling this kind of connection, or one can feel this kind of connection because one creates that kind of connection, or feeling of that connection, because as I said, the connection is kind of already there, but creates the feeling of the connection in their own mind because they expect this kind of connection, and because they think it makes sense. What if, in fact, this personal experience is actually just, not necessarily influenced by everything around, but is actually just a product of that person's individual mind, and a program in their mind that they design for themselves? So you have to be very, very careful with these things of personal experience. It's like near-death experience, where people say, oh, I walked through a bright tunnel. Well, this could just be a repeating program that the mind sets up for when it comes close to death. It does not necessarily mean that they're actually like being drawn spiritually through a tunnel or something. It could just be a program that exists solely in the mind, and that the mind enacts when it gets into like crisis mode or gonna die mode. So think of this very, very carefully, especially if you're going to use personal experience as some sort of justification for some sort of belief or some sort of potential feeling of how the universe is organized. In my personal opinion, it is always best to have a fully integrated view of reality and of the universe from various points of view. And as I said before, anything that claims to understand or claims to know the truth doesn't, frankly. So your guardian says that he was once very selfless and is now very selfish. You, on the other hand, say you were very selfish and now you are very selfless. Me, on the other hand, I am neither of these things. I simply am as I am and act in accordance with what I feel is best in every circumstance. I'm not trying to be anything other than simply trying to be.